In a matter of weeks, our lives were turned upside down. And this happened amid one of the strongest financial rallies ever. Suddenly, everything changed when it became clear that the coronavirus was spreading around the world, killing hundreds of thousands of people. As of April 28, 2020, Worldometer reports there were more than 3 million cases of the coronavirus. The spread of the virus also spread fear. And that fear may in the short term and likely into the long term be even more significant than the virus itself. According to Dr. Mark Mullins of Veras Inc., an expert on global markets, macro investing, and public policy, he says in the same way that 9/11 was a one-day event that triggered an endless global war on terrorism and the rise of the security state, Mullins now says, I believe the social and political response to the pandemic is ushering in the era of the safety state, a fundamental change in a response to today's complete breakdown of social trust and stability. Mullins goes on to say, the crisis moment will dissipate with time, but the safety state will continue, bolstered by permanent policy actions and the barnacle-like development of new institutions, technologies, and social habits. We invited Dr. Mark Mullins to join us for a conversation that matters about the shape of our world during and after this once-in-a-century public health crisis and how the aftershocks will last much longer than the virus.
Conversations That Matter is a partner program of the Center for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the following and viewers like you. Please become a patron at conversationsthatmatter.tv.
Dr. Mark Mullins, welcome to Conversations That Matter. Thank you for coming in and having what I think is a very important conversation as we look at the way that we're going to come out of this coronavirus situation, not just financially, but also psychologically. You talk in your recent blog about the introduction of the safety state. What do you mean by that?
Well, I chose those words carefully, especially emphasizing the safety side of it. I think that's the essence of what's happening out there. We're kind of faced with a bit of an invisible foe. We just don't know where it is, who has it, what are the chances we can get it. And so there's a real premium here on safety, particularly in public spaces when you're out with other people. It just called into question how we leave our homes and how we interact at work, at school, and our leisure activities. And then the state side of it, I didn't mean specifically just the government, really a state of mind, a state of being, our society, and how we're all going to adjust and how we already are adjusting to this new regime. And I suspect it's not here for the short term. It's not a transitory shock. It's a little bit like the war on terror. We've been in that now for 20 years. I don't think we expected that at the outset. This one's maybe a little more obvious as to what's happening, but even if the pandemic, and it obviously will fade away over time, I think it's going to institute some longer-term changes. Government policies, institutions change, people's attitudes change. For example, will handshakes be commonplace, or will they fade away over time? Will we replace them with something else? The thing that I don't think is going to change, which is pretty obvious, is human nature. Some of our obvious needs and desires to be social creatures and to be with each other. And it's just a matter of how we work that out. How do we adjust to this new circumstance?
So we've been hit on a number of fronts here with the coronavirus pandemic. One of them, of course, is our health. Another is the tremendous shock to the financial system. And this, of course, is your background. How do we describe the speed, the depth, and the breadth of what the impact of this has been?
Well, on the financial side, that's a pretty easy question. Greatest ever for all those reasons. I don't think you can actually find a faster downturn in the market. And by the market, I mean specifically the stock market, the world global stock markets. But it's also obviously affected bonds, it's affected debt instruments, it's affected currencies. Probably the worst hit by far is the oil market, which was trading only recently at $60, $70, $80 a barrel. Some types of crude oil actually went negative, as people know, in the last few weeks. And we're trading down into sort of a $10 range right now. So it's been dramatic. dramatic. It's been like a 30-day disaster in a way, the likes of which we haven't seen for a long, long time. Many people go back to the 1930s and say, well, what about the Great Depression? Others more recently with the Great Recession in 2008. And I think this is absolutely comparable. And of course, the world economy is that much larger. World financial markets are that much larger as well. And so the dollar value of this, the pain threshold has been lifted enormously and obviously had a big impact right around the planet.
How will that then play into our need to want to try and establish financial as well as physical, health security as we move forward?
Well, it's very tricky. Now, the good news in a way is the markets come back as it naturally does. The real question is how sustainable is that? For the last 10 years or so, we've had a exceptionally long economic expansion. That's quite unusual. Started off quite weak because of the terrible situation back in 2008. We may well replay that with the depth of this one right now. But out of that, I think we moved to a situation where we had some very highly valued markets. That was obviously a bit of a trigger or a sensitivity, let's say, when this pandemic came along. Looking forward, though, we need growth in the economy. That's ultimately, and technology as well. But those things are going to be the elements that drive stock prices up, that raise financial asset prices. And that's really the foundation for savings, what people are saving for the future. Unfortunately, a situation like this turns everyone to the here and now. They become very risk adverse. They're very cautious. They're thinking about only today. That's a bad situation actually for the economy. People aren't saving for the future. They're not thinking longer term.
Going to your point about wanting to seek out secure and safe investments and to protect ourselves, and when it comes to our finances, we've seen this tremendous drop. There sometimes is this sense within people who are investing in the market, well, maybe I'll jump in now that there's a rally. But that can also present itself as a little bit of a sucker's game. Is it a dead cat bounce, and is it then going to drag even more capital or savings out of the market? Do we have that potential at the moment, or do you have enough faith in the robustness and the long run of positive markets that we've had that we're in a position where we can actually potentially rebound pretty quickly?
Well, we've already had a pretty good rebound,
Yeah.
so that's initially a good sign. And why was that? Is it because the market's enthusiastic and hopeful for the future? I'm not so sure about that. What we've had, and again, going back to 2008, it's lessons learned. Central banks around the world were unbelievably quick to respond to the market crash here and to assess the pandemic and what that might mean for the economy. And they've literally thrown trillions and trillions of dollars in the form of a safety net underneath the markets. Now, are they trying to raise asset prices? Not necessarily. Really what they're trying to do is prevent a collapse in the financial system. And that's one thing to look at today against 2008. That was a financial crisis, pure and simple, which had economic impacts. This is more of a real economy crisis, which could have a serious financial impact into the markets and into the banking sector. I don't think anyone, honestly, could sit back today and say, hey, I'm fully assured the market's not going back down again. It's going to keep going up here. We're out of the woods. There's too many examples in history where we've had this recovery and it's been a bit of a head fake, and as a result, you're in trouble. So I guess what you would say to investors today, if you can look forward, if you can put your money away for 4 years and 5 years and 10 years and so on, the odds are extremely high that the market's going to recover over that time span and very likely go to new highs.
The question is, who is going to, or what kind of mechanism is going to create this sense of safety for the average person, for institutional investors and so on? Is it going to come from the marketplace, or is this an opportunity where we might see government expand its authority and reach, saying, we'll make sure that this doesn't happen again, or we are the governing body that is going to provide you with that safety and certainty that you require?
Yeah, I guess it's both. People are looking for some guidance here. Certainly governments have been quite forthright in terms of what they've done. Question is, have they gone too far in certain things? From a Canadian perspective, we haven't had quite the lockdown that's been seen in Europe, for example. We've had a bit more freedom, and I guess at the end of the day, governments are going to reflect the popular will, at least in a place like Canada, the open societies that we have in the West. And so, in a sense, we're all going to determine this. We'll determine how much freedom we need, how much restriction we need, how many regulations we need. I think the other thing to remember, too, is governments, generally speaking, are quite risk adverse. They don't like making mistakes.
Yeah.
They don't like taking responsibility for mistakes. And so I can imagine this is going to be a gradual process, a careful process. It's one that they're really going to be reluctant to rush into. And that, unfortunately, in the short term, could cause more economic damage than less. But I think there is popular support for that sort of perspective.
One of the things that I found astounding in some ways is the remarkable acceptance and willingness of the average person to say to the government, okay, I'm going to let you take absolute authority at this moment. I'm going to allow you to tell me to stay in my home, and you're going to shut down those businesses that you deem as being points of potential transmission, and I'm going to accept this, and I'm going to allow you to govern by decree rather than through a legislative process. Is this something that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, I guess the key thing is getting that popular acceptance. And I think of an example here from the War on Terror. You probably remember the days when you could walk into an airport and put cash on the counter and get on a plane. No security, it was like going on a bus, essentially. Obviously, we're in a different world today. That, I think, generally has been accepted. One wonders about the efficacy of some of the policies, and I always like to think about the difference between Canada and the U.S. And the U.S. are often putting shoes through the security. Take your shoes off and put them through the X-ray machine. Canada not. Well, what's the safer method? And we probably don't know, or maybe we can guess, but it's obviously one or the other. And yet this isn't being challenged. So I think some things come into play and they stay there. And so I think the important thing is that we continue to question these things, that we continue to convene Parliament, for example. We continue to have question period. We continue to have journalists out there. And I can say one thing I'm really pleased about in Canada, and I think it's true in some other places too, is our health officials have been open on a daily basis to questions from the media, responding to their concerns. A very open and fairly transparent system. I would have preferred even more information, maybe, in terms of where have the outbreaks taken, allowing people themselves to risk assess. But generally, I think we're in typical Canadian traditions here, and I expect those to continue. And that's all to the good to prevent, an overreach or something that's really going to be harmful, either to our freedoms or to our economy, or even just our simple way of life.
I know that you appreciate the work of Hayek, who basically talks so much about the role of the economy and economic forces at work. How important will it be that those economic forces are given the opportunity to go out and address many of these issues that people are going to start to say, okay, demonstrate to me that you can deliver that service or that product, and I'm going to be safe.
Well, that's right. And I think it's more than even just economic. I would say these are informational issues, and that was Hayek's one of his big ideas was, planners, people at the center, just can't know about hundreds of millions and billions of people and all their activities every day. All of us are self-motivated, and we're integrated in so many complicated ways. And that's essentially the market. It's people making their decisions, and out of that we see what happens with the economic activity and other things developing. So I think what it is and my hope here again is that government isn't so prescriptive that they say, oh, you shall do it this way, and we can have no change from the way that we've asked you to do it that way, and we start cutting off all the creativity and all the ingenuity that's out there. And I guess, again, as an example, if you look to the U.S., this whole question of testing. Criticism initially in the U.S., you're not ready for tests, you're not testing enough people and so on. All kinds of issues on the regulatory side, which drugs can be approved, which tests can be approved, and so on. And it seems to me what's happened there is the government brought together private sector players, the labs in particular, the drug companies and so on, and in a very short order of time they were able to many-fold increase the tests that were available. We've got people all over the planet now in the pharmaceutical industry working on vaccines, treatments, and so on. You want a million flowers to bloom here, and to make sure that as a public policy matter, you're not restricting it and saying it'll be this way or the highway. To give another tiny example, Georgia now is one of the states moving ahead in the U.S. To open up their sector. I read this morning for restaurants, they're saying no more than 10 people for 500 square feet. Okay, so that's 2 people for 50 square feet, or 100 square feet rather. That's a 10 by 10 area. So think of a table for 2, 10 by 10. Can a restaurant make money with that?
Yes.
Is that too restrictive?
Right.
Do people want to sit in a lonely spot in a restaurant? There's so many issues.
Right.
It's a good start, and the hope here is that we have a nimble government, a nimble regulatory regime, and they can roll with it and discover together with the private sector, with the demands of people, exactly what works and what keeps business in business, and also meets the needs of everyone for all the things they want.
Okay, so that raises a very interesting issue. I think that the response to this and the way that we have created all these social distancing requirements has dramatically slowed down the pace that you can do anything.
For sure that's happening, and it's going to happen. And in fact, I wrote a piece recently called The Bottleneck Economy for exactly that reason, to talk about all these ways in which revenues go down, expenses go up, time is unproductive, let's put it that way, but it's trying to reach something to create that at least a perception, if not the actual fact of safety for people. It's absolutely going to happen, and it is happening, and that in turn is going to slow the economic recovery. It's going to make things into something that's not normal. We're definitely not going back to where we were, and I think it's a whole number of years now that it's going to take for this to start fading from the collective minds of people. They're not on the virtual side of the economy. They're not able to sell at a distance or to produce at a distance, and I think those trends have been in play now for many years, and they're only going to accelerate towards the internet economy, towards the virtual economy. And I guess another element here is it's going to be tough being small. Added cost base. A lot of these places, frankly, aren't coming back just for cash flow issues. And so I think the big brand names, the big companies, the ones that are well capitalized, and the ones that can tap financial markets as well in the banking system, I think they've got a leg up here in terms of moving forward.
And how important is it that whatever is delivered is done so providing a sense of security? And if you can do that, is there also a tremendous opportunity right now?
Absolutely. And we're definitely going to see new areas growing up here. I can imagine a testing regime. That's a pretty obvious thing. People are well on their way to making commercial products. You've got 7 billion people on the planet. They want to know whether they're sick or not. They want to know whether they should go out or not, whether their family's safe. You can imagine with that demand that you've got an instant market in place. I suspect we're going to move to a health passport at some point. Most people talking about international travel expect that to open last. There's a kind of a natural affinity for your own people, your own citizens, a bit of NIMBYism, I guess, or xenophobia even. And so that it's going to take quite a while to open up that international travel market. Well, how do you prove someone's safe when they travel from one place to another? It's just simply not going to work, this idea of a 2-week quarantine on each end. Nobody's going to take a 6-week holiday to get 2 weeks in country.
Right.
It just can't work that way. And so I suspect at some point we're going to move to a health passport. It's totally accepted as a matter of citizenship and travel that you need to have a passport. I can imagine the health side of it as well. Well, to do that, what are the information systems that are needed? What's again, back to monitoring and validation, certification, and so on. And here are new economic activities that with some creativity can be done at low cost and at great scale.
And we are willing to accept that. And I think at a personal liberty price as well.
Well, I think so. And, honestly, what's the big deal to have a health passport? I think people look for an element of reasonableness to this. I don't think over the longer run, standing 6 feet away from everyone in line everywhere you go, that doesn't seem like a sustainable solution to what we've got.
I already see it breaking down.
Sure, yeah. Although, the minute you start seeing outbreaks happen, people of their own accord are going to react.
Yeah.
I think there's another element here, too. It's difficult to talk about it because people think you're mean-hearted or that you don't care about life and suffering and so on. But there is a reality here that there's risk, and we simply cannot eliminate the risk. We can manage it. We can try to reduce it. We're obviously doing everything we can now to prevent death and suffering and further contagion. But if this is a virus that's here to stay, we have to come to grips with that. And I think even over time, people get used to the idea that there's a certain low level of risk out there, and they'll act accordingly. In the same way that we accept risk when we drive our cars on the highway, when we travel in airplanes, when we go to other places, other countries, let's say, that have risk of malaria, cholera, and so on. We accept this as part of the background. And whether we think about it deeply is another issue. And I think one of the things that's interesting today is everyone right now has placed this issue as their number one concern on the entire planet. And it's saying something about this global village we have, how we talk to each other, how we know what everyone else is doing on the planet. And it honestly does tend to exaggerate the risk, or at least the perception of the risk, which is not to dismiss in any way this virus. It's a very nasty one. No one wants to get it. Obviously, there's tremendous suffering here as well. But I think over time, as the crisis fades, as we put in place other measures, it's going to become part of our accepted mode of risk-taking. And therefore, it may not even be interesting to talk about in 10 or 20 years as sort of an element that people care about more than, let's say, other concerns that they have.
And thus, the safety state will be with us.
Hopefully fading at that point.
Hopefully. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming in and sharing your insights on this.
All right. Thank you.